Hello, my name is Ava Eady, and I'm the Library Services Manager for Manatee County Public Library System, a division of Neighborhood Services. Welcome to our new show, Inside the Cover, on METV. I'm fortunate to be here today with author Echo Heron, a terrific writer with a broad range of books. Echo's latest book, Noon at Tiffany's, is the story of Clara Walcott Driscoll, an extraordinary but historically unrecognized woman and designer. Echo, welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Now, you have such a broad range of talent, and you've written in so many different genres. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I started out writing back in the early 80s, and I had some books that were published by Random House and Simon & Schuster, and they were in a different genre. It was true medicine, and then I went on to write medical mystery series. So I was working at the time as a critical care nurse in emergency room in CCU, and that's where all of my information came from for the nonfiction books and also for the fiction, for the mysteries as well.
What got you started writing to begin with? Did you start when you were young? Is this something that's always been a love?
When I was just a little kid, I was a voracious reader. That was my favorite thing to do. And I started writing stories for Christmas presents, little stories when I was about 7 or 8. And I just had this love of writing and reading. And when I was in high school, one of my teachers said to me, you're a really fine writer, and you should look toward that as a profession. And it was really that one teacher who changed my life, because I always had that aspiration to do that.
That kind of teacher is so inspirational.
Absolutely.
And I know exactly what you mean. I think teachers throughout our life, they can be that point that you jump off from, because they touch you in such a way. What made you move from genre to genre like you did? Noon at Tiffany's is a completely different type of book for you, after the medical mysteries, after the nonfiction.
Right. It's, I like to say it started in 2007. I heard a national public radio broadcast about this collection of letters that had been found that proved irrefutably that Clara Walcott Driscoll, this farm girl from Ohio, was in fact the designer, the creator of all the Tiffany lamps and windows.
Wow.
And the story grabbed me. And when you're a writer and a story grabs you like that, you have to get that story out, and so that's what I did. Another reason was most of my writing life has been dedicated to empowering extraordinary women who have gone unrecognized simply because they are women, which was exactly the case for Clara. She lived in Louis Comfort Tiffany's shadow for many years, for actually about 118 years.
Wow.
And I wanted to stretch. As a writer, I needed to stretch. I had gone from nonfiction, true medicine, to writing medical mystery thrillers, and I decided it was time for me to take another step out of the medical arena and into writing this wonderful story about this intriguing woman.
And she really is intriguing. I so enjoyed reading about Clara, and I had such an appreciation for her strength, but also how impressively and gracefully she handled so many things. So how much of what you wrote is based on fact and how much is based on assumption?
After I heard this broadcast on NPR, I embarked on a 5.5-year research journey that took me all over the United States, and I felt that this was the story that needed to get out. The journey into research was extensive. I went to Kent State University, where in the archives library they had all the letters, some 1,300 letters, and I read all of those letters over the course of the year, and from that I based my research on that. And then, of course, reading many books about Lewis Comfort Tiffany, and a memoir that had been done by one of Clara's relatives.
Okay.
And so I based approximately, I'd say 80% of this book is based on fact. The other 20% of the book is based on intuitive conjecture, informed conjecture, really. For instance, I mean, I couldn't really go behind closed doors and hear the dialogue that went between Clara and Lewis Comfort Tiffany, but from reading her letters, and she wrote meticulous letters, daily letters to her mother and sisters about life in turn of the century New York City.
Right.
So it was all right there for me. Okay. So I could draw from that and from her personality and from everything I read about Lewis Comfort Tiffany, because Mr. Tiffany didn't really leave a lot of written material, any memoirs, nothing like that. So I had to go to the books that were written about him, mm-hmm. A book written from his children's point of view of what he was like, from court records, from health records, from census records, so that I could piece together the personalities, the events as they happened, and from that, when it was fictionalized, I sort of psychologized who these people were and what would have happened. Okay. But it was really all based on my research. Right. The fact.
And you allude to these letters, and you've done so in the book a number of times, this round robin of letters between Clara and her mother and her sisters. Tell us a little bit more about that, what they were like, and also what it was like to get hands on these original documents. That must have been so intriguing to learn about life in that period.
The round robin was, I mean, obviously there wasn't email in those days, so the round robin was a system where, for instance, Clara's mother, Fanny, would write a letter, mm-hmm. Giving the news of the week or the day. She would send that letter to her daughter in Cleveland. That daughter, Emily or Kate, would write what was going on. They would add to that letter, send both letters to the next person, to Clara. Clara would add what was going on in her life, and then all of those letters would go back to Fanny, and they would all go around again, and that was called a round robin.
Wow. It
was a very popular way of communicating, especially within groups of relatives. So from those round robins, and I read them all. It took me a year. There were 1,330, I think. From those round robins, it was fascinating. They almost could be a novel in and of themselves. I took most all of my material from there, and in the book, I actually start many of the chapters with Clara's actual letters or pieces of those letters all put together for one letter. Lewis Comfort Tiffany's log, I end most all chapters with a small excerpt from his diary. And now those are conjecture, but they're conjecture based on what was going on with him historically that I read, court records, et cetera, what was going on. Or in the New York Times. The New York Times was always writing little pieces about the Tiffany family and what was going on, much like some of our movie magazines today about our celebrities. A gossip column, exactly.
Back in the day,
yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And speaking of back in the day, that wonderful sense you have and how you bring in New York City and that atmosphere and that almost cinematic feel that you have. It's wonderful to read that period piece and to have such a really great feeling that you're part of that historic period and that time. You must have done a lot of research to get that feel. And how did you go about that?
Well, I went to New York City, and I went to all the places where Clara lived and worked, where the Tiffany mansion had been. And so I sort of canvassed Gramercy Park and all of those places. And certainly by looking at photographs of New York City in those times, reading lots of books about what it was like to live there, although Clara did, I must say, provide a really good picture of what it was like to live there. So all of that, and originally being from upstate New York and spending quite a bit of time in the city when I was a teenager, you get a feel. You just get this feel, and you're there.
Right.
It's just like as a writer, when I'm writing, I will frequently become the character. I'll put my head in a certain place to be that character, so you can pretty much feel what they were feeling and see what they were seeing. New York City is such a dynamic place. And it's so well documented as a place that it's very easy to go back and imagine what it was like back then.
Right. And there's so much with Tiffany, of course, you know, as you say, there wasn't a lot of documentation from him, but everybody knew about Tiffany throughout his lifetime. He was a very famous figure, and of course, his work was so famous. How much of an impact do you think Clara had on his work, and how important was she to his success?
Great question. I guess I would answer that question by saying that you have to look at the facts. Tiffany's company took off after 1888, which was the exact year that Clara began working there. And it failed the year after Clara left, which was in 1909. So I guess that speaks for itself. I think she was amazingly instrumental in his fame, which of course ties into why I wrote this book, because I really felt that people needed to know that this woman was, I think, responsible for much of Tiffany's success. In that she designed so many of these beautiful things, and she was so prolific. And unfortunately, she was never recognized for that. Now, Tiffany did recognize her talent. He did put her in charge of the women's department, or the Tiffany Girls, as they were known, a department of 35 women. And although he didn't give her the recognition, he did pay her very well. He paid her as much as he paid the men in the men's department, and that was almost unheard of in those days.
Absolutely, in that period, that's almost shocking.
Yes,
that's the case.
Yes.
It was interesting to hear about the girls, and I loved how so much of the work came from nature. so much of her designs, and that was his focus and her focus both. What were some of the important things that she could probably be most recognized for those who love Tiffany's work? I understand daffodils were one of her big contributions. What were some of the other things?
The daffodil lamp, probably her most famous lamp, the one that she won an award for at the 1900 Paris International Art World's Fair, actually, was the dragonfly lamp, the wisteria lamp, which many people know. As I said, in one of the letters, I think maybe 1906, she wrote a letter in which she stated to her mother, her mother and sister had gone to a shop that carried Tiffany ware, and the mother was commenting about how beautiful these things were. And Clara said, well, as to date, I've designed approximately 125 lamps, and most of everything you see, and she did do what they called fancy ware, individual pieces, ink pen rests, ink wells. She did all sorts of little things, including jewelry. She did design some jewelry for the senior Mr. Tiffany, Charles Tiffany.
Interesting. So what was your biggest challenge, do you think, writing Noon at Tiffany's?
Well, certainly the research and the language. When you are writing about that time, turn of the century, they didn't talk like we do now. They didn't write like we do now. So there were no contractions. So there were no I didn't or I can't. It was I did not, I cannot. And so I had to walk a fine line between writing in the modern way, so modern language, so that people would be able to get through the book easily, and staying true, and yet still staying true to the way they spoke back then.
Okay. You obviously have a love of language, and as a librarian, I can definitely appreciate that. What role do creativity and art play in your life?
They are my life. I think that I've been writing since I can remember. I do quite a bit of photography and some painting, and it is my life. It's what gives me my greatest fulfillment. And certainly in my writing, as I said earlier, I have been very involved with wanting to empower women who've gone unrecognized, and that is very fulfilling.
What else would you like to tell us about Noon at Tiffany's, maybe that I haven't covered?
Wow, it's funny. I just recently read it again, as if I haven't read it 100 times besides writing it. I think it is such an amazing look into people's lives in so many different ways. I mean, everything from how Clara and all the women of that time, if they weren't wealthy, would make over their dresses and have their shoes repaired season to season because they simply didn't have the money to go out and buy a new dress. And fascinating in how Clara talks about her first ride on this brand new mode of transportation called the subway. And she describes it as being this shining, gleaming bathroom because of all the white and green tile as she's going at breakneck speed on this subway. And so she rode the very first subway. And
wow.
And just, you know, the excitement of the elections of Teddy Roosevelt and Tammany Hall, and it was very entertaining.
And her first bicycle. I
And
loved
her
reading about that.
first
I'm a bicycler, and so I got such a great deal of pleasure hearing about her first experience on a bike and how exciting it was. How something we so take for granted these days.
Yeah,
it's just intriguing.
Exciting because it gave her freedom. It provided freedom for her to move around the city, to go into places where women might not have been able to go before that. And she loved her bicycle. She got a lot of mileage out of that bicycle.
Very good. So where do you go from here, Echo? What, you know, I know one of the things that was interesting to me about this book was you came up with your own publishing company, Heron Press. What motivated you to do that? Are you going to write more books? Are you going to take on other authors? What is it that you're up to these days?
Well, I started Heron Press because, as I'm sure you know as a librarian, the publishing industry is changing very rapidly. I believed so much in this book, and I couldn't really get the publishing world interested in this book. So I said, that's it, I'm going to start my own company, I'm going to put this book out, and I've done that, and I have at least 3 more books that are pretty well finished that I'm going to be publishing through my company as well.
And these are your own books?
These are my own books, yes.
You're going to tell us a little bit about them?
Well, let's see. We have I have a sequel to a book that's already out there, Tending Lives, which is it's going to be called Behind Closed Doors, and it's stories from ER nurses all over the United States, including the nurses who worked on 9/11.
Wow.
I have a book about my cat, Mushi, who I traveled the world with. It was a very unusual character called Mushu Pork with Pancakes to Go, because that was his real name. And I have another book that I would like to get out, and it's called Blue Notes. And Blue Notes is an epistolary novel, which is a novel of letters between 2 young women starting in 1965 and ends in 1989. And so we go through the counterculture revolution, and
wow,
that's a pretty exciting book as well. Has
that's
everything
intriguing.
in there.
So are you going to take on other authors? Is this something that
it could be in the future.
Okay.
I'm open to anything at this point, so yeah.
What kind of encouragement or words do you have for other authors that are perhaps interested or on the cusp? You have so many books. You're such a prolific writer, and you have such a broad range of talent. And of course, you've been through this publishing concern. What kind of words would you share with them that will help them be successful or get in the right frame of mind for what they're tackling?
Right. Don't give up. You know, I like to refer to the Stockett, I think, the woman who wrote The Help. She received 61 rejections before that book was finally accepted. Wow. And many best-selling books are a result of a lot of rejections. But you just keep plugging and just keep going forward. I felt with Noon at Tiffany's, the reason I went ahead and self-published was because I felt I was more or less running out of time. This was something that was discovered in 2007. I wanted to get her story out there, and I wanted to get it out quickly, and this was the way to do it. But really, main advice to writers, do not give up. Keep plugging forward. If you believe in your book, keep going with it, keep pushing it.
You know, I keep thinking of a woman who started as an ER nurse and who was inspired by a teacher and found her way to medical mysteries and now to championing other women like Clara Walcott Driscoll. It's so impressive, and it's so exciting to find somebody who has a broad range but also who keeps growing. That's always been such a big part of what I believe. I'm a big fan of lifelong learning, and So is there anything else that you would suggest to people who are maybe not following a traditional path, or a meandering path is the one they chose?
I always go by, and especially when I was working in ER, I always went by the philosophy that everything happens for a reason. You know, I picked up a book when I was 6 years old and started reading and decided to start writing little crazy stories, and it all happens for a reason. And I think I would tell people that who are following a path toward being creative, toward being a writer, being an artist, don't give up. Just keep looking forward. It's okay to take, you know, a diversion here and there, but just keep looking forward, and things happen the way they're supposed to. Good.
Anything else you would like to share with us about Noon at Tiffany's before we wind up today?
Well, I think it's a very entertaining book. It is getting wonderful reviews on Amazon, and I'm very proud of it. And I feel like Clara is, in some level, loving the fact that the real story of her life is finally out there. Mm-hmm. So,
very good. Well, I certainly appreciate your time today, and this has been such an interesting opportunity for me to hear from the other side. You know, I get people united with books, but I don't always get to find out what the inspiration for a book was, or what that path was that the writer took. So this has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It has been wonderful.
Thank you. I can't thank you enough. I thank you for coming, but I also thank our audience for coming and joining us. It's been a really exciting opportunity for me to talk to Echo and to talk about Noon at Tiffany's, which is the extraordinary story of the gifted Clara Walcott Driscoll. Come see us at any of the Manatee County Public Libraries and pick up a copy of this or other wonderful books and ebooks. Thank you for joining us, and a special thanks to METV for hosting this program. We'll see you next time on Inside the Cover.